You're welcome. Shit, I fucked it up. All right, here we go.
Okay.
3, 2. All right, welcome everyone. We are here today with the Falcon of the West, Taylor Morrow. He's going to show us his in progress Iyslander deck that he's pretty stoked on. Taylor, how's it going?
It's going pretty well. I have been trying very hard to make this deck very good. And so this is kind of where I landed at the end of Road to Nats. And so hopefully this inspires the either people who are Iyslander curious or helps the Iyslander truthers out there with their inspiration and maybe they can bounce some ideas off of what I got going on here and we can make this hero even better. So
Nice.
that's where I'm at.
Just doing it for the people and, bringing that ice frosty coolness to the mainstream. So, what can you tell us about this deck? What's your overall thesis? Putting this together, what's your main goal?
Right. So uh, originally, so on our podcast, shout out to the Attack Action podcast. Uh,
Great guys.
I decided that a personal challenge to myself would be to try to mainline Iyslander, who I thought was really cool from Everfest already, and I will probably say that a lot as uh, a pun, maybe say stuff is cool when we're talking about an ice hero. So just you know, edit in the wah wah sound if you want to.
That's just how we talk. It's not our fault.
So anyway, so I gave myself this personal challenge of just being an Iyslander main, which I'm really excited about because I actually really like this hero and I think it's really cool. But uh, with that came the caveat of I think Iyslander is a little bit fair in terms of a hero to play and one to be relevant in the meta. So the meta is like really wide right now, and Iyslander kind of struggles with having so many different matchups that they would have to face, and kind of Prism still being around. So if like your meta is like heavily Prism or Dromai, you should not play this deck. That's like just a really bad matchup. So kind of the starting thesis of this was that personal challenge. And I wanted to kind of also experience the game how a bunch of people experience it, where they just go, this is my hero, this is what I'm doing, I'm going to try to make it great. And it has been a lot of fun and very rewarding. But figuring out what this deck really needed to do into the meta, or at least into some certain popular matchups, was like pretty challenging. So, kind of, there's two axes you can attack people from. So, you have kind of this tempo plan where you're trying to slow your opponent down enough to create small windows for where you can kind of get some damage in, and sometimes you'll have like a big disruptive turn, maybe where you like really frost them out with like Sigil of Permafrost, or you have like an Insidious Chill trigger on an Aether Ice Vein. So you strip cards, deal some damage, and then you make this like kind of big window for you to be able to deal damage. And then you kind of like have this tempo control plan where they just get low enough to where you can basically use Storm Striders in a combination of a couple of different cards to kind of come in with the kill blow. Uh, that being said, some of the nuance is using Storm Striders either as like a safety valve or the kill shot. And then you also have this combo that revolves around Frost Hex your Insidious Chills, maybe your Amulets of Ice, and any kind of 5 damage spell you have with Sigil of Permafrost. And you use that against the kind of slower control decks. So that's kind of what the deck is doing, right? Is giving you taxes, and you're trying to use Waning Moon as much as possible to kind of get that damage in.
Nice. So,
Yeah.
just like two questions off of that. Like, what's a fair deck? Like, what does that mean? I've never heard of that, or like, at least lately. I'm sorry. Uh,
Yeah, so a fair deck means like I don't have access to some extremely powerful cards. Like I don't slap down a Channel Mount Heroic and then have these insane turns. I don't have a Mordred Tide Revel in Runeblood kind of just all majestic hand I can just draw into to like spike some damage. You have just like cards that are pretty on rate in terms of like the flesh and blood value system,
totally. Yeah,
right?
it
That
seems
makes
like
sense.
her damage range is like a little more compressed,
Yeah,
where the bottom's not too low, but the ceiling isn't too high, and it is just isn't as aggressive. I mean, it's not an aggressive deck, at least not in this
right.
form. So it's not going to do the insane stuff. Although I've seen a couple pretty nutty turns when we've played a couple games together. So I know it's got some heat to it, despite being an ice wizard deck. Boom. All right. So how about just some like high level stats? How many cards do you have in your main deck? How many blues in there? Because I think for Iyslander, that's definitely one of the main ratios that I think means more than probably any other hero.
Yeah, okay. So it's a 72 cards with our equipment and weapon making up the other 8 cards. In the kind of main deck over here, in this general larger region, is 45 cards. And so in those 45 cards, you have 33 blues and 24 blue ice cards. So then you only have 12 reds. And so you're basically going to be adding in 15 cards from your sideboard, which is over on the right. And you are basically going to like 40 blues and 20 reds ish, kind of.
How many
It's
yellows are
kind
you
of
running?
0 yellows.
Just couldn't fit Chain Lightning or Sonic Boom in there. It just doesn't make sense, sadly.
No, it doesn't. Yeah,
All right, all right. Let's
unfortunately.
before we go too deep into that, how about you walk us through your equipment choices?
Okay, sure. That sounds great. So the kind of we're running Waning Moon in every single matchup, and Coronet Peak and Storm Striders. Those are the 3 that are always being run. Waning Moon, right, deals 3 damage on your opponent's turn, 2 on your turn. Coronet Peak is at first I was like, oh, I don't get it. It's not great. But then you realize that the more turns in a row that you can coronet peak, the more often that's what creates those windows for you to be able to deal damage and disrupt your opponent. And it especially keeps them off of kind of those bigger spike turns when they're the aggro decks, and you really need to not let those happen. So it's really great. And then at the end of the game, when you need to like maybe save a card or two, you can just coronet peak for defense, which is really awesome. Against non arcane decks, we're running Tunic. It's a staple in mini decks. Everybody knows why it is good. You get a resource every 3rd turn, which is like really useful for things like Sigil of Permafrost or our Oasis Respite. It also makes it a lot easier to play a 2-cost spell from your arsenal and then Waning Moon, because that's 4 resources. And then with the Tunic, when you pitch a blue, makes it really easy. Tunic also pairs pretty nicely with those Ironhide gauntlets that we use in most of our matchups, or Storm Striders, right? So Ironhide Gauntlets is just there for the block 2. You pitch cards most of the time anyway, so it's a good value for 1 resource. And then Storm Striders, incredible, really powerful, legendary piece of equipment.
Best boots in the game.
Yeah, easily the best shoes. I think they maybe look the best too. I like the way Storm Striders look even over like Spellbound Creepers.
Fair.
Moving on. Alluvian Constellus is like one of my new favorite cards. It makes your Visceri matchup like way better and gives you so much value off of Waning Moon for just blocking Rune Chance. I mean,
So
it basically
good.
equals like how long the game goes, like 12 to 15 damage, but for free, basically. Kind of. It feels free.
It's like you're investing in it by protecting your life, which is
Yeah,
it's pretty sweet.
it's awesome. I really, 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 really like it. I wish more heroes did arcane damage so I could
Run
main
this more
board that.
often. Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
That's the only
that's how.
downside of this card is that you don't get to play it enough.
Yeah, exactly.
Best
And
robes in the game.
definitely, as a robe connoisseur, you know.
That's what I'm saying.
Then moving on, we have Metacarpus node. Those only come in the Kano or the Mirror match. It allows you to have Arcane Barrier 4, which is pretty sweet against Kano. Makes that matchup a lot easier, because then they try to Wildfire you, and it only deals 2 damage. And it's hard to combo when they do that. Then from there, our last piece of equipment is the Conduit of Frostburn. This I was pretty high on when I started, and I might cut it, but I also don't know what I would do with the extra card at this point. But it's better than the Ironhide Gauntlet, when you can pitch one of your blues that blocks for 2, and then now it blocks for 3. So against go wide decks, it can be kind of really cool. It also maybe could have like a niche case scenario against like something like Dorinthia, when you like block exactly because you really need to, but then they like Iron Song response you, and then you can kind of like, I don't know. It might not be that great, but it is really good for something against like Fi, when you turn like one of your cold snaps into a block for 3, and you get a block like some really relevant bits of damage, like a Phoenix Flame. Maybe they do attack you for 4, then you can block for 3 and stop the breakpoint and that sort of thing. So
Nice.
the other ability on it you do not use, the instant ability, because you're hardly freezing anything in this deck. So that's the equipment.
Nice. All right. Let's jump over to your main deck.
Okay, so
Cool cards
yeah,
in
go
here.
ahead. There totally are. So kind of in this upper left corner is just our red cards that are in the main board. You run them in every matchup. Aether Ice Vein Red, if you can get 2 of those off in a game, you're feeling really great. It's really powerful, really great card. Freezing Point is most of the time just a 3 for 5. You really only fuse it and use it for its like ability against control. That's where it really shines, when you have like 3 frost hexes out there. Then it comes in for 8, and if you pair that with Sigil of Permafrost, that then makes 8 frostbites, and then with 3 Frost Hexes, which I'll walk you guys through that combo. That's 8 times 3, so it's a lot of damage. Sink Below, super good, blocks for 4, kind of can fix your hand staple in mini decks.
I would say you're probably not playing that from Arsenal generally.
Yeah, so in most matchups other than the control matchups, you pretty much never want to Arsenal a red unless it's going to be the Storm Strider's winning play, basically. And the defense reactions, you can Arsenal in rare circumstances against aggro decks. But really, once you play that defense reaction from Arsenal, they go, oh, okay, cool. No taxes, and kind of hammer away at you. But against like Guardians, where they're a little bit slower and they're trying to dominate you a lot, you're mainly just like blocking and looking to set up anyway. So if you do have the space to or like are left with a defense reaction in hand, or sometimes it comes up and you can Arsenal a defense reaction and it doesn't punish you very much. That makes sense?
Yep.
Sweet. So then this middle-ish column, not the ice bolt down there, but the middle part, those are your just blues that either fuse or are just a spell. Like Immerous Scalding is great because it's a 4 damage spell. Aether Icebane Blue is the baby sister to Aether Icebane Red, still really good. Ice Eternal is very good. I waffled back and forth when the set came out. I was like, this card's busted. Then I started playing the deck and I was like, this card should do more. Then I got better at playing the deck, and then Ice Eternal became very good again. So you can do some great stuff with Frost Hex and win the game, or slow your opponent down with tons of Frostbite. With Tunic up, it allows you to pitch with 4 blues in hand. Well, you actually only need 3 blues in hand and a Tunic up. You can pitch 9 from hand with your Tunic makes 10. So X equals then 5. So then you make 5 Frostbites, do 5 arcane damage, which I would say it would be pretty hard pressed for anybody to be able to pay through 5 extra resources. But of course, you have to have the life total to be able to not block. But can be very powerful. Then the rest of the cards there in the board are just your blue ice cards. Most notably, the real standouts are Hypothermia is really great, basically in every matchup. Even now in the Guardians, they're running Zealous Belting. They Zealous Belting you, boom, you can Hypothermia them. Sometimes they like Rouse, E-Strike, etc. So Hypothermia is just like always online. Against maybe Phi, you could sub it out. And I usually do, because Phi's cards are usually like, they all have Go Again. Things like Blazing Headlong and Searing Emberblade are the only 2 really prevalent cards that have Go Again, or that gain Go Again, that Hypothermia stops.
Nice.
So that's maybe the only matchup that's like not great against. Cold Snap is I think one of my most average cards. I'm kind of liking it a little bit better recently, but so many times decks like play out their Arsenal card first, right? So you never get to catch them with it. But on the times when you do kind of freeze their arsenal, draw a card, and then it synergizes pretty well with Waning Moon. It can be really good. It synergizes really well with Waning Moon because it costs you 1, and then when you pitch a blue, you have 2 floating to then Waning Moon, and you have an extra card to defend with, which is pretty cool.
Yep.
But a lot of times, if you do Arsenal it, it is just a Frostbite. I mean, when you evaluate it, it basically reads like deal 3 damage and draw a card, right? And give a Frostbite. Yeah. So when you think of it that way, then it is pretty good. Channel Lake, everybody knows Channel Lake is really good. It's a little tough playing it at instant speed for 2. It doesn't do any damage, and hopefully they don't have like double blue hands is kind of when it really blows. But the thing I've had to come to grips with is if you play Channel Lake out and you're not able to keep it for a turn, you have to be okay with living in that reality. And then your games go a little bit better. Because when I was kind of learning the deck, I was like, "Ooh, I got to keep it around so it has like maximum value." And then you kind of like take a little bit too much damage potentially for not great payoff.
To hold like the ice card in hand.
Yeah.
Well,
and like,
yeah, you need an ice card plus another card to pay for.
Save.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's tough.
Yeah. Which we'll talk about that kind of turn cycles and that sort of thing. So in the best case scenario, you play Channel Lake, it screws up their turn. You're allowed to save 2 blues. One of those blues you use to Coronet Peak, and then you get to keep your flow. You get to put a flow counter on Channel Lake, and it stays around. And then you arsenal that blue, and then you have gained quite a bit of tempo then, which would be great. But that doesn't always happen, so you have to live with, I play Channel Lake out, gives them a Frostbite, and taxes that turn, and then I only have 1 card left in hand, and it's a blue, and I arsenal it. Then the last couple of cards here we can move through pretty quickly, I suppose. Aether Hail, great. It basically reads, give them a Frostbite and deal 5 damage. It's a 1 cost blue that blocks for 3, pitch a blue, and it synergizes really well with Waning Moon. I wish I had 9 copies of it. The deck would be so much better. Arctic Incarceration, great card. I initially was playing it, well, okay, so against aggro, play it out, gives them 2 Frostbites. So it's really good. It makes it so you can maybe save 2 cards and then Coronet Peak them and then arsenal the other card. In the Guardian control matchups, it basically reads, pitch me for late game and then I deal 6 damage, which is really awesome because you give them 2 Frostbites at the end of their turn and then Frost Hex will deal them damage. So if you have 3 out, it would be 2 times 3, which is 6.
Nice.
Insidious Chill, very good card, very hard to play in the aggro matchup. So Insidious Chill and Frost Hex are really hard to play when your opponent is being very, very aggressive, because they're kind of the only thing you're going to do because they eat up all of your resources from your 1 blue card that you pitch. And their initial investment at instant speed from Arsenal is very low, right? Insidious Chill is like paying you off later in the game, and Frost Hex is only good if you have multiple of them in a turn. And then Insidious Chill is like pretty tough to have in all of the time because it blocks for 2. But we just don't have a lot of options for blue ice cards that have bigger upsides than Insidious Chill. So we're just running it.
Yeah, it's pretty oppressive when you get multiple of these out and then you're fusing and it's just like, cool, I'm gonna pay 4 or lose 2 cards, and it just gets
Yeah.
really really bad. Okay, so we've talked about this a lot. So let's. Is it time to kind of go into Frost Hex in all its glory?
Yeah. So Frost Hex, super great for the baseline fact that it's a blue ice block for 3. Right there, super good. Then it has its added ability that frostbites at the end of turn when they're destroyed deal 1 arcane damage, and it's multiplicative. So the more frostbites you have, the more damage it deals. The more frost hexes you have, the more damage that deals. So 3 frostbites with 3 frost hexes at the end of the turn equals 9 damage. So
Yeah.
that's what makes Arctic Incarceration super good at the kind of end of the game for no resources. It can deal 6 damage, which is really great. So really a big part of the combo against control. And then I guess lastly, I didn't talk about Ice Bolt. Blue blocks for 3, deals damage, is an ice card. Best when Tunic is up, play that. Waning Moon, 6 damage. Not bad.
Yep. I mean, Frost Hex is just nutty when you have all 3 out there, and then you do your Ice Eternal, and then also have like Insidious Chill. You're just like dump all your cards, get a bunch of Frostbite, and then you die. Then it's pretty. It's pretty
Yeah.
infuriating. I definitely was a bit salty every time he did this to me when we were practicing. And it's nuts too, because like the only way to get rid of Frost Hex is with Thaw. So unless you're playing Dromai or Phi, and I don't think either of them run that very much.
Yeah, you don't need to.
It's well, yeah, Dromai doesn't need to. Phi,
Yeah.
probably doesn't need to. But otherwise you're just like, what do I do about this? It's under my control. There's nothing that lets you destroy the aura under your own control, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah. It's the only card in the deck that I feel like is I don't know what the word is. Uh feels broken in certain matchups because you can't get rid of it. But that is such a small percentage of the meta and decks that it then makes it fair at the same time.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But the saltiness, right, is also a thing you have to get used to as playing Iyslander. Is when you win your games, nobody is happy at the end. You're exhausted because it took you 45 minutes and your opponent is upset because you've been stopping them from playing the whole game.
Yeah.
Or you've been setting up an unstoppable combo basically. And the only way to stop it is for you to be dead. So
Yeah.
your opponents are like never happy when you beat them.
At the Battle Hardened in LA, basically at the end of every single round, there would be 1 or 2 games left, and every single one there was you working your way through it. It's a slow deck, but it can, it seems like it could be pretty rewarding when you get your reps in. So, should we talk about some sideboard stuff?
Yeah, totally. So you you kind of have these 2 axes that I talked about already that you can attack from, and one of them is your kind of tempo game plan, right? And so for those, excuse me, those game plans. Okay, well, let's talk about the sideboard here first a little bit. That the 6 attacks are basically your flex spots. I don't even think you need these. They're just in there because you might have to play Dromai. And I would cut those if I could figure out what 6 cards would be better, because Dromai or Prism are just um, they're the matchup is so in their favor that for you to spend so much sideboard space, it would hurt your matchups you are actually able to win. So I wouldn't dedicate any more space to those. You just got to take the L on those matchups. So, and the reason I have one nourishing is because I actually didn't own at the time 2 or 3 erase faces. But nourishing is great because it blocks for 3,
Nice.
basically. So, CNC does come in against Bravo, but that's because you have to cut some other cards to put that in, but we'll get to that. So let's talk about the non-arcane aggro package you have to side in. So 45 cards, so you need to add 15 cards. So things like Blizzard are coming in. Those are really great because they give a frostbite and you can play them from hand and, taxes your opponent by 2. Amulet of Ice comes in. Those I prioritize playing over Insidious Chill against something like Fi or Katsu,
Mm.
unless I really have a free turn to play Insidious Chill, like turn 0. Amulet of Ice is just way easier to play, and you need to be a little bit careful with when you strip cards. So Insidious Chill is not a may, it's a mandatory trigger. Whereas Amulet of Ice, you can trigger it anytime you Ice Fuse. So a little bit more flexibility there. You're also going to bring in Brain Freeze. So this is the
Ooh.
extra spice tech here. So Brain Freeze is, I think, your best 0 cost elemental wizard card. Um, because it card, whereas Icebind also fuses, also is blue, also blocks for 3, but only deals 1 damage. And most of the time, either your opponent has played out their arsenal or they're like, sure, whatever. Whereas Brain Freeze, you can actually take out a whole card. And in the aggro decks, they run a lot of 0 costs. Even in like Rune Blades, you can just put Mordred Tide right back on top of the deck, or Revel in Rune Blood, or their Mordred Tide, or any Fi card basically doesn't cost any resources. So just put those right back on top. So it strips a whole card. Plus, it fuses, so it triggers Amulet of Ice and Insidious Chill, and it
Nice.
blocks for 3.
Is
So
it just me? Does it look like this guy is taking a selfie in this picture?
he kind of is.
Every time
Yeah.
I see it,
Because he can't believe what's
he's
happening.
blowing his own mind by with the selfie he's taken. Nice. I'm excited about the inclusion of that card. It's interesting and probably not one that anybody or many people are looking at as like a very good card.
Yeah. I mean, you need to, like, against aggro, not let them play their 5 card hands.
Yep.
And Brain Freeze 100%, unless for some reason they have a bunch of 2 costers in hand or 1 costers. Then their turn is probably not going to be that great anyway. And then now you kind of have that information. So I actually really like it. That was kind of a late addition, and I was like, wow, it is really good.
Nice.
Then you're also going to bring in your channel the bleak expanses. So that hits way more cards than you think it does. And it's a little bit easier to play because it synergizes really well with Waning Moon because it only costs 1. So it hits Belittle. They pitch their blue to pay into Sonata. Boom, channel the bleak expanse. Hits anything for Force of Nature, Snatch. Um, there's a few other cards. So there are quite a few cards that it works on that are really relevant in a lot of decks. So you bring in Channel the Bleak. And then lastly, you bring in Oasis Respite. It's super good. but we just don't run it in every single matchup. So that's why it's in the sideboard, but you run it in almost all of them. So that's kind of your non-arcane aggro package you need to bring in.
Nice.
Then your arcane aggro package is basically the same. You sub in the Constellus for Tunic. And then you, against Visceri specifically, is where we get the Pyroglyphic Protection, which is super busted. This card makes that matchup go from like maybe 50-50 to like 65-35 in your favor. It's really good. So when they play their Mordred Tide, and then their red Mauve Skies, and then their red Shrill, and you go, nice, sweet. And then they still have like a card in Arsenal and a resource floating. You go, okay, I'll just block that Shrill for 6. And then they look at you and they go, okay, I will make this many more rune chants from Bavri and Skies hitting. And you're like, yeah, totally. And then they play Revel and you go, Pyroglyphic Protection. And then they flip it around and then they read it and then they call the judge and then they ask how that card works. And then you say, yeah, it's going to block all 16 of your rune chants right now and one from your Rosetta Thorn, you know? And then that's boom, you got rid of that huge turn with 2 resources. It's amazing.
That's pretty sweet. Yeah, definitely doesn't say the next 1 arcane damage. It just says flat out prevent 1 arcane damage from that source.
It does. So, yeah.
That's awesome.
Super sweet. Super sweet. So that comes in instead of, what else do I put in? Excuse me, I gotta look at the notes. I got so excited. So that comes in Blizzard, Ice Amulet, Brain Freeze, and Channel the Bleak. So you cut Oasis Respite against Visceri, just because you don't really have the space and you need the other cards that do, a lot more. Against Briar, and this is probably what I need to test a bit more, you don't add the Pyroglyphic Protections because she doesn't do that much arcane. They do run Revel, but with Briar it's only 4 arcane instead of like 5 or more, so you can kind of handle that a bit better. So then you add in 2 Oasises and you add in one of your red Aether Hails just because you kind of need a little bit more damage, and that's like a little bit easier to cast if you're left with your Tunic resource. And I'm unsure if I run Alluvian or not. I think I run Tunic. Sometimes if you run Alluvian, they just don't swing Rosetta and you get no value out of it, but maybe the value is that they don't play Rosetta as often, but then you kind of would just rather have the Tunic resource over the course of the game. So then you can save a blue, Aether Hail, Tunic the Aether Hail, and that kind of helps you chip in a bit more damage, if that's how it goes. And then, yeah, so those kind of general sideboard guides. Then for control, stop me if you need to ask questions. I'm flying through it here.
I'm here on it. Let's go. Let's talk about control. This seems like the most fun one for you.
It is because it's your easiest matchup. You're really favored into Bravo and Oldhim. It does get a little tougher when they play a bit more aggressive against you, but even then, you have plenty of tools and plenty of experience from playing actual aggro decks that you're going to be okay. So against control, you're going to add in your 3 Oasises, because now that allows you to block with 2 cards from hand on something that's dominated, which is really nice because it's an instant. You have to add in your Brain Freeze because it's a blue that blocks for 3, but you're rarely going to cast it. You add in your 3 Aether Hails, and you add in the 3 amulets. So most of the time, like Channel Bleak doesn't hit for anything in those decks really, and the other cards just do way more. You play Brain Freeze over Channel Bleak because it blocks for 3 and it's a blue. Against the Bravos, you're going to play CNC, and maybe you get to cast 1 or 2 of those in a game. That's kind of nice because the game's slow enough that it gives you enough space to do that, but you don't need to win. And then against Oldhim, you just put in the Erase Faces and the Nourishings instead in that slot. So this is the only matchup. So in most matchups, we're like 40 blues, 30 ice cards, 20 reds, or whatever it is, 41, etc. However the math actually works out. This is the only matchup where you go to 38 blues, and that ups your chances of having exactly just 2 blues in hand. So it's like every third turn you only have 2 blues or something like that, which is fine, which is kind of the minimum. But you will get like a bit more, you might get 2 red hands in a game because the game goes so long, and you just kind of have to live with that. You, the listener at home, might have a better idea on how to make those ratios a little bit better so you can have that extra 1 blue card. But I haven't needed to figure that out yet because this matchup is like fairly in your favor. So how these matchups go is you're really trying to get out any combination of Insidious Chills and Ice Amulets, and you're being very frugal with your Sigils of Permafrost in any of your 5 damage spells. Ideally, you want to have Freezing Point because it does more damage. And then you're looking to set up 2 minimum of your Frost Hexes. 3 is really great, but sometimes you will have to block with 1 or it'll be awkward or whatever. So the only time you really want to take big chunks of damage is to play out a Frost Hex or an Insidious Chill. And you're trying to pitch stack your Freezing Point, Sigil of Permafrost with Ice Blues, basically. They don't have to be in the same hand. They can be like 8 cards apart because you would like to draw into 1, arsenal it, potentially, and then draw your next hand with the other piece of the combo. So like if you draw Sigil of Permafrost first, you save it, you arsenal it, you have your Insidious Chills, your Amulets of Ice out, you're looking great. Your next hand is going to be 3 blues, hopefully more than 1 ice card just to make your life a little bit easier, but all you need is 1 ice card, and then your Freezing Point, so that then when they attack you, you can play Sigil of Permafrost from Arsenal, fuse it, then you're going to activate Storm Striders once they pass on reactions because you need Sigil of Permafrost to resolve. You don't want to do anything in response to playing that card, or else it will not. Its ability doesn't become a layer on the combat chain link. Then you Storm Striders in your Freezing Point and fuse that. And both of those fuses will trigger any counters you have on any number of Insidious Chills. So let's say you had 2 Insidious Chills out, 1 with 3 counters and the other one with 2. So Sigil of Permafrost, when you fuse that, will trigger both Insidious Chills, and that will be 4 resources worth of pitching. Then when you trigger Freezing Point and fuse that, that will be another 4 resources. So they really can't keep any cards in hand. That's 8 resources. So you could pitch three blues and be okay, right? But at that point, they've probably already pitched a card and played a card, so it's unlikely that they have four cards in hand, um, if that. So you get rid of all of their cards. Then, because you have three Frost Hexes, Freezing Point will, because it's fused, comes in for 8 damage. And then you have Sigil of Permafrost ability on the stack, and you dealt 8 damage in a perfect world. That makes 8 Frost Bites. And then times 3 is 16 more damage. So it's a 24 damage combo. And then they're dead. So that's how it works.
Wait, you made you did 8 damage already, and that
Mhm.
does 8 frostbite. And then if you have 3 frost hexes, that's 24. That's 32, right?
That's what I said, 32.
Oh, I thought you said 24.
No, I did say 24.
We will rewind it in real time and see who was correct.
So it's a 24 damage.
24 damage combo.
Oh wait,
No, you're correct. It's 8 times 4, not 8 times 3. Yep.
which I just wanted to point out is a lot of damage.
It
So-
totally is. But it takes you 20 turns
Yeah,
to get there, you know? And so it's it's a little bit less if they block a little and etc. So you really want to chip them below 20 is kind of where you want those control decks to be. Once they're below 20, your life is a little bit easier. And then, plus or minus, depending on if you can Waning Moon or not in there too. So it's usually get there. And so saving your tunic is really important. You need that extra resource, so don't block with it willy-nilly. And that whole combo only costs you 3 from Freezing Point, 1 from Sigil of Permafrost, and 1 from Storm Striders. So 3, it's just 5 resources is all you need. So 2 blues takes care of that, no problem. But having the tunic resource helps you if your pitch stack gets a little wonky and you have an extra red card in there or something like that. So it makes it easier to fuse.
cost 5 after you've already set up everything else perfectly. So
Right. Yeah. And the most of your life
Yeah.
and that sort of thing. That's the other thing is you have to be really cognizant that you can't die to the attack because you have to let Frost Hexes kill them.
Yeah.
So you can't be so low that 1 defense reaction for 4 isn't enough to save you. So
Nice. Okay.
navigate that.
So, what are some like basic tips for someone who's starting out on Iyslander? Just maybe some gotchas to look out for, some play patterns that seem obvious that might not be the best, things like that you would kind of recommend for anyone jumping into the lake frigid, as it were.
Totally. So Ice Eternal is way better late game, and so like pulling that off mid game is kind of hard because your deck isn't thinned from the reds. So if you can pitch those later, I've won games off of just an Ice Eternal and 1 Frost Hex out. Like they're low enough to where they have to like block the 3 arcane that you make with 2 blues. So X equals 3 off of 2 blues with a fuse is 3 arcane. And so they have to block some of it because it actually equals 6 if you have a Frost Hex out. And it actually equals 9 when you still have a card to fuse with. So it's way better when they're like at 9 health or something like that rather than like mid game. So since you are maining Sigil of Permafrost, you have to be really careful for when you rattle that off because you only have 3, right? I've like toyed around with having more than 3, but the yellows are hard to have, and the blues don't block enough damage, so they don't really feel worth it. And I haven't had a problem like pitch stacking a red, so I felt like I didn't need any more. But um, if you have like an Insidious Chill or an Amulet of Ice out and you use a Sigil of Permafrost, you just have to kind of calculate where you're at in the game and how important it is to actually fuse it and maybe use one of your really important counters on Insidious Chill or use one of your Amulets of Ice. Those are really precious resources against aggro decks, and just you'll be happier if you can use them closer to the end of the game than the start of it, for sure. Let's see, what else? What are some other good tips? Like I kind of said earlier, using Coronet Peak often, if possible, is really good, especially when you can kind of Coronet Peak maybe 2 turns in a row. It really kind of messes up your opponent more than you think it does, if that makes sense. Like
Yeah.
they're arsenaling specific cards for potentially 5 card hands, and then now they only have 3 cards in their hand plus their arsenal for a 4 card hand. So um, it can compound itself.
Yeah. It
And
feels like you're trading a
go ahead.
card for a card, but I think its impact is greater than that.
Yeah, it definitely is because, like I said, it helps make those windows possible for you to deal damage, and it makes it easier for you to math out their turn when they have one less variable. You can also do cute stuff like you could save, sometimes you'll have this permafrost turn and you'll need to you'll deal some damage and their turn will end early and you'll kind of be left with cards in hand, and sometimes that's like Cold Snap, which has Go Again. A lot of your cards don't have Go Again, but you can Cold Snap them, and then if they only pitch a red or don't give you a card, then you can then also use your maybe one of your 3 cards in this circumstance to Coronet Peak them, and so now you've frozen their arsenal and given and stripped a card. So that's like pretty huge, and that sounds like magical Christmas land, but that definitely does come up often. That you will be like sometimes left with cards, and you can be there in that scenario.
One thing I've noticed when playing Iyslander in limited was that you don't always want to play your blue card out on their turn, and like sometimes it feels like it's better to do more stuff on your turn than always trying to do it on their turn. And I was curious what your feelings were on that. Is it always best to be playing on their turn? Obviously, Waning Moon gets that extra damage, but like where's the priority, and how do you kind of judge what's better on theirs or your turn?
That's a great question because that is the skill in the deck, right? Is so like playing Iyslander means every turn you have to calculate all of the variables on both sides of the table. So one of the things you have to think of is like how much damage am I going to take versus my payoff I'm about to have. So Red Aether Icevein is a great example of this. It ideally, right, like at the end of every turn, you kind of want to have 2 blues is the ideal. 1 to Arsenal, 1 to Coronet Peak. Which only leaves you 2 cards to block with. But then when you have an Aether Icevein in hand, you can only block with 1 card because you want that fuse effect. So you want to be able to pitch, play Aether Icevein, fuse, arsenal your fuse card. So you have to really weigh the impact Aether Icevein is going to have versus your opponent. So if you have something like an Insidious Chill out, or maybe an Amulet of Ice, you could then maybe take a bit more damage to really deal some damage and slow them down, and then arsenal a card. Like in a Magic world, you have your 3 cards you're left with are a blue Aether Hail and Aether Ice Vein, and you take, maybe 12 damage, but you get to play red Aether Ice Vein, fuse it, triggers Insidious, and deals them 5 damage, and then strips another card. And then you get an Arsenal blue Aether Ice Vein. So you're really dealing 10 damage over the course of your turn, their turn, right? And then on that turn, when they try to like salvage their piddling hand, it makes it really efficient for you to use blue Aether Hail from Arsenal. I guess that's 11 damage, excuse me, with Waning Moon just for 1 card. So there's that. That's the tough part. So that's what you kind of have to weigh back and forth. But most of the time, a lot of your cards are gotcha cards, right? Like Hypothermia or Cold Snap or Channel Lake Frigid, those sort of things. I play on my opponent's turn quite a bit, unless it's the control decks. Then you can play on their turn a bit more. Like you can cast your CNC or just play your Channel Lake into Coronet Peak, which is sick.
Nice.
But you know, the aggro decks are way harder. It's like which is weird, right? You would think they would be easier because it seems like that's what your hero is meant for, to defeat, but it's not really. It's like the classic wizard thing, like, because you're a Kano aficionado, Colin, and so when you're up against aggro decks, they feel really in control, and you're really playing into your odds and your outs in that matchup. And it feels the same in Iyslander as well. Like you are trying to stay even with them. If your life total is even or you're only a few points behind, you're basically winning because you always get 1 extra turn because you can Stormstriders for the win. Which does bring me to a little bit about Stormstriders. So you can use it as a release valve. So let's say your opponent breaks Stubby Hammers and then plays Stubby Hammers is banned, right?
It's banned.
So
Don't talk about
you don't
that.
have to worry about that. But in this circumstance that we had to live with before, they would break Stubby Hammers, play Art of War, and then you would go, oh crap, here comes 40 damage. You can then use Stormstriders to play your Aether Ice Vein red from hand, triggering your Amulets of Ice or your Insidious Chill, and spell them from Arsenal and strip cards and tax them. And that saves you so much during the game. But you have to be finding that spot is like takes a little bit of practice, but you can use Stormstriders like that and still win the game because you can still play cards from your arsenal at instant speed on their turn to win. So
Nice.
that's a little tidbit there.
That's your oh shit handle.
Yeah, exactly. Break in case of emergency for sure.
Nice. Awesome. Well, it looks really cool. I mean, I think I would be into it, except it seems too fair. And if I'm going to be slinging spells at people, I want it to be slightly busted.
And that's totally fair. That's totally fair. But I do hope that I have inspired some folks or, have helped them figure out their Iyslander decks so we can get more eyes on this thing so we can get it better.
Yep.
and more viable. I mean, your perfect meta would just be like Viscerize and Guardians. Like, I feel like those are the matchups that I would feel the best playing against right now with this particular 80 cards.
Nice. Well, it might be a lot of that if Prism hits Living Legend. We'll just have to tune back in after that happens and see where we're at.
Yeah, we'll find out.
Well, thank you, Taylor, for walking us through this. I think this is really exciting. I, too, hope that more people explore this deck. I think it's really interesting. The hero ability and card pool just offers a lot of ways to aggravate and cause pain to your opponent, mostly in their brain space, and, you know, having to give up the wonderful cards in their hand and just ruin their turns over and over again, which is, you know, as you said, it's not fun, but it's pretty cool. And I think I'm excited. I hope they give a little bit more support for her. I think her ice wizard pool and just maybe a couple other cards that interact with the things she's trying to do. A couple more good blues, which, you know, if you're a brute player, you know, LSS is really reluctant to give good blues out to you. But yeah, I think she could be really, really powerful with just a couple more cards, which is probably why they try to keep her, you know, a little under the curve for now, but still very cool.
Yeah, makes sense. It is cool. It's really fun to play. The disruption is really addictive. I feel like I've gotten better as a player having to continually play both sides of the match a lot. You know, and you really get good at your timing windows and communicating with your opponent about when you can respond to stuff. So those are some like tangential added benefits of playing Iyslander.
Yeah. If you're ever confused about how priority works or how things resolve, play a wizard and you will have to master those just to play your deck correctly and, you know, most efficiently, which honestly, that's what I've appreciated the most, because I think there's a lot of wonderful creativity that happens in those interactions that is one of my favorite parts of the game. So
Indeed.
Any last words for our budding ice wizards out there?
Gosh, I wish I had something witty and very funny to say, but I don't. So something corny, stay frosty.
Stay frosty, y'all. Thanks for watching. We could just sit here. I could pretend. I'll just sit very still until you think of something funnier to say. And then we'll just pretend like you said that the first time.
I put a hex on you. I'll get you and your little dog, too. Frozen, bro. Oh, wait. Here's one. What killed the dinosaurs? The Ice Age! Or whatever Arnold says from Batman.
Oh, dude,
That's
yeah.
it. That's all I got.
You just gotta watch
Mr. Freeze.
You just gotta watch Batman, and you'll get all the lines you need for playing Iyslander.
Yeah.
Nice.
Totally.
That's the real end of the episode. Thank you. Good night.
No. Double goodbye.
We'll just keep going.